welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss natural resource management, a look into parks' everyday challenges. If you're just joining us, this session is being recorded and we would love to hear from you. So please put your name and your affiliation in the chat box. Thanks for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Johnston. I'm an education programs coordinator with the Ecological Society of America, and I am one of the hosts that does these webinar series. In addition to me, I have two colleagues with me today. Jessie, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Rivera. I'm a partner in crime to Jessica. Glad to be here.
And Nicole, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm the education intern here at the Ecological Society of America this summer.
Okay. Nicole, do you want to do the rules of engagement for today?
Yeah. So quickly going over the webinar guidelines, this is an informal Q&A session with our panelists. So if you would like to join the conversation, just click on the raise your hand button and you can unmute your mic once called upon. And also you're welcome to post comments and questions in the chat box at any time. This is a recorded event, so you will be able to view this webinar later at the ESA YouTube channel underneath the SIPS playlist. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we're gonna go over quick introductions with our panelists and do a little quick Q&A session as well. Next slide. So without further ado, it's my honor to welcome Dr. Alexandra Gillick, who is not only a 2021 Subfellow alumni, but she's also doing her postdoctoral at my university. So Dr. Gillick, welcome and go Gators.
Hi, everyone. And yes, go Gators. UF is an awesome university. I don't know, Jessica, do you want me to just introduce myself a little more, like a little blurb, or just
yeah, why don't you say, you know, what you did for the fellows last year, and then we'll kick it over to the next slide.
Yeah, sounds good. So I was a 2021 SIP fellow for Buck Island Reef National Monument and Christiansted National Historic Site down in St. Croix, US Virgin Islands. Most of my fellowship was conducted remotely. I was using a really large data set they have for monitoring their sea turtle nesting populations in the park. And so it's basically my job to just assess current trends in abundance and reproductive parameters for their sea turtle population.
And which is the reason why you're perfect as a moderator today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm also really looking forward to introducing today's panel. First, Ryan Trimbath, if you want to say hi, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Hi, I'm Ryan Trimbath. I'm a biologist at Cuyahoga Valley National Park. I'm a big fan of scientists in park and bringing interns and fellows into Cuyahoga Valley. So I'm happy to be here and answer some questions today.
Great, and our second panelist, Jacob Gross.
Hi, everybody. You can call me Jake. I'm the botanist for the Pacific Island Network. Incorporate a network of parks throughout Hawaii, American Samoa, and Guam and Saipan. And I kind of lead up the vegetation monitoring for those parks, and also a big fan of the SIP program. We had crew of 4 SIPs with us last year. A couple of those returned as alumni this year to work for us, and a new crew of 3 this year. So I think a couple of them are on the line too, and checking out the show today. And so happy to be here and answering questions.
All right, and our third panelist, Beth Fallon.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Beth Fallon. I'm the plant ecologist at Mount Rainier National Park. So I manage the vegetation program here, which includes hazard tree management and developed forests and restoration work. And then we also work on monitoring of long-term sites in coordination with the inventory and monitoring program in our area. And yeah, we have one great scientist in park intern working with us this summer. And then we often have interns through Scientists in Parks or Mosaics in Science. So happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So Jessica, is it okay if I just get the discussion started? I'm not seeing anything in the chat popping up as far as questions yet.
Go right into it. You have some questions lined up, but I just wanted to say to the audience one more time, don't be shy. This is your opportunity to connect with some people outside of your park and ask questions. And as you can tell, they're already on board with the Scientists in Parks program, so they know what it means to experience this internship. So at any point, you can drop your name or drop your question in the chat. And if it's like kind of long-winded, we might even ask you to unmute and ask your question verbally.
All right, that sounds good. So the first question I have for our panelists are, how did you get to where you are now with your career?
I guess we can go in order. I'll go first. It's been a long road. I'm currently in my first permanent position of my life, really, at age 37. I'll be 38, but so yeah, it's a long road. I mean, I think I enjoyed and kind of signed up for this sort of long road to get to a permanent position. But I got an undergraduate degree from Ohio University in wildlife and conservation biology. I spent about 5 years working seasonal jobs after that, bopping around from New Hampshire to Oregon and all sorts of places in between. I focused a lot on birds, and birds are cool because they have generally like 4 seasons. So winter, spring migration, breeding season, and fall migration. So that allowed me to do quite a bit of work throughout the year. And then I went to grad school, got a master's degree from University of Akron, studying forest plant communities and the impacts of deer and earthworms on those communities. And then kind of landed in a pathways position here at Cuyahoga Valley to help run the deer management program that we've been doing for 7 years now here. And then just kind of in the right place at the right time, running that program when our biologist retired, and I was in the right place again to kind of move in to that. I am still working on my PhD. I have some research going on the Great Lakes and on the island of Kauai, and that's kind of been not overlapping with the work I do here, but science has always been a core part of my perspectives on conservation. I'm not traditionally trained in wildlife management and those sorts of things you might get from a large state school with a large wildlife program or something like that. But I bring the perspectives of science and ecology and evolution into my everyday sort of work. So I know if you're working for the Park Service, a lot of times it's resource management background, but a strong science background combined with resource management really goes a long way in solving and identifying problems. So I think the one thing of advice I give people all the time is just take every opportunity that's given to you. You know, if you want to do something, find the people who are doing it and don't be afraid to volunteer or poke your head in and say, hey, I like what you're doing. Can I come check it out? And that just really starts the ball rolling and follow up and follow through. That's key. So I think that's a bit of rambling, but I'll pass it on.
Yeah, persistence is definitely key. I could relate to that just to get into grad school. So yeah, Jacob or Beth, if one of you want to hop in.
Sure. Yeah. I'll give a little bit of my background too. A lot of it is sounds similar to Ryan's experience there. Kind of the same stage there. Didn't get into a permanent position with the park until about more like 3 or 4 years ago, so about the same time period in my life as Ryan. But what kind of started me into this career, I think I would say, is interest in the outdoors, camping with family when I was younger, and then kind of early on doing a youth conservation corps summer experience with a game preserve there, Fish and Wildlife in North Dakota, White Horse Hill National Game Preserve. That was kind of my first, introduction into the resource management and public lands management world, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I was doing working on trails there was kind of the first job I did with them, and that was in high school. And then after working, some other jobs, in like grocery store bag clerk and some of those things, I decided, yeah, I think I really do like working outdoors and working with public lands management, and think I'll try to go that route. I also had a good biology teacher that kind of put me on the trajectory too of exciting, getting excited about biology and natural resource management. Let's see, I moved to Kansas during my high school year and ended up working for Youth Conservation Corps for another refuge, park refuge, or refuge there. That one was Flint Hills Wildlife Refuge, and had a good mentor there, and he kind of encouraged me to just apply to lots of different places, experience the different all the different nuances of working at different places throughout the country. So I just sent out a lot of different job applications and ended up volunteering out in Hawaii. And that was about 16 years ago. Kind of fell in love with the environment in Hawaii, the people and the land, plants and animals, and it's kind of stuck around. And same thing as Ryan, worked a lot of different seasonal gigs for quite a few years. Went and finished, went and did some grad school. And that, my first attempt at grad school didn't quite work out the way I wanted to, and went back later on and did grad school. I'd be happy to talk about that too, just keep it working seasonal and temp jobs until something finally came up with a park that could get in as a permanent employee there. So that's a little bit of it. Be happy to talk about anything else there, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thank you. Beth, you want to hop on?
Sure. Yeah, this is also my first permanent position in my life. I had a term position I'll tell you a little bit about, which was previously like the most job security I had. So it's quite similar, ditto for that. But yeah, I got, I don't think I was particularly interested in science growing up, but like other people, my family did some camping, lots of ticks and mosquitoes in the Midwest, and I got undergraduate degrees in botany and biology and environmental studies. And then I had a couple summer jobs that were, one was at the Forest Service, which was pretty formative because it was incredibly unstructured and just kind of like a lot of wandering around the woods in Lassen National Forest, which was great. I loved it. But the first longer term position was as a student conservation associate intern at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. And that's it's a really incredible Sonoran Desert Park on the international border. So it was a really cool opportunity to learn new skills. It was a lot of focus was on GIS, but I also got to go out with these incredible biologists in the park and tag along for long-term monitoring work for, the cacti there, but also the snakes. And I just love that experience and kind of thinking about what it means to do science within a park environment that has a lot of challenges. And then I did seasonal work, especially in the Southwest, for seasonal or sort of short-term or temporary work in the Southwest for another 5 years. I got a position at the Sonoran Desert Network Inventory and Monitoring Network. So that's it's the MPS arm that works on basic inventory and monitoring of vital signs in Sonoran Desert area parks. And I was doing vegetation mapping, and that was a really cool opportunity to start to think about what was on the landscape and why did it look like that, and what are the environmental influences, because in the desert, in like abiotic environments can really hit you on the head in the way they express themselves in biological communities, and in a way that's more intense than like a closed canopy forest like here in the Pacific Northwest. And you know, after that work, I also decided that I maybe wanted to be able to have a little more say about the kind of the way the science and the methods were structured, and get more time to think about the results, because in the desert you can just work all year round. So we were just out in the field all the time, which now that I think about complaining about that seems silly because it was amazing. But I also, you know, you didn't get time to digest and learn how to do analyses or write reports. It was just we were out there identifying plants, which again was a huge privilege in hindsight. So I went back to graduate school and got my PhD, focusing on some areas of the Southwest, thinking about the ecophysiology of oaks especially, and how drought tolerance and freezing tolerance structured their plant ranges. I did a postdoc, and then I was really looking again for a permanent position, ideally in the Park Service, and especially one where you get to know a place. I think it's there's kind of lots of different ways you can do science. And one is to think about the theories about how the world should work and investigate problems with a theoretical perspective, like what system will help me answer this theoretical question. And one way is to sort of embrace the complexity and like complications of the world as it presents itself, and get to know like what's actually happening within like the vegetation in a specific area. And that really appeals to me, to start to like learn the natural history of a place and to think about how science can influence work in that area. So I was pretty excited to have the opportunity to learn a new place, but also get to learn it in depth and think about how research can help us inform like applied work here in the park.
Great. Thank you all for sharing a bit about your background. And yeah, it's really encouraging to hear, as I'm also looking for a federal position. I'm sure many other folks on this call are looking for them too. So one question that came in through the registration link, and I think this is a nice segue into this, is what advice would you share with a recent graduate hoping to make the leap from an NPS internship to a federal career?
Well, I guess, go ahead, Beth. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious what you would say, because every time I think I have like what a resume or what something should look like to get a federal career down, it turns out I don't, you know, but one thing to do is, you know, you have completed this internship successfully with someone in the Park Service, you can leverage that relationship to like ask them to maybe help you make connections. Because that, I mean, the way I got my first term position with the Sonoran Desert Network was I had worked as an intern within the park in that network. And so they could, you know, contact my supervisors and ask if I was like a reasonable employee, I think, you know, a competent employee. So that's one way to really think about doing that, is to ask people to help you make those connections, which can be a good first step.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, the connections are really important. It's pretty hard to just get into a position, you know, without knowing that kind of group of people that are working there. It does happen, but I think it's probably pretty rare. So I think anytime, if you have your mindset on a particular place or a particular topic, you know, I'd really focus on trying to just build connections in that network of people that are working on that topic or area. Even if you know, aren't in that NPS position or federal position, then you'll be in a good place if one does come available. So, you know, I think my best advice would be to not worry as much about getting the federal position right off the bat, as opposed to just building that network and connection with the people that are working on that particular topic that you are interested getting into.
I'll echo all that. I mean, I passed my tests in school, but I was never a standout student. And if you stacked me up against a number of other candidates for various jobs that I've gotten, I think that I don't know where I would have sat. And to be honest, I know that it was my connections and my networking that got me a lot of my positions and got the ball rolling. And it's it's unfortunate in some ways, but it's also great because that's some people like myself, I struggled in school and I got by, but I have seen a number of people who do amazing once they get into the workforce, and their resume or their academic sort of transcript doesn't really match what their capacity is within this field when you get them out into the world and starting to do some hands-on things. So if you are in a position like that, where your transcripts or whatever don't look as good as you want them to, definitely getting any sort of opportunity to show your skills off in the field and network will go a really, really long way. And I think it's important to have short and long-term goals. Like, I always knew that I was like going to go to grad school after 5 years. Like, that was kind of my intentions and my goal. Because there's really like a critical point in your career where you got to kind of make that decision whether you're going to try to climb the ladder based on your experience, or you're going to utilize that education to find some, specialize your niche, like find that place where you're going to fit, or elevate your status from like a seasonal or an intern into something else. So I personally think it's really important to hold off on grad school, get a lot of experience, do a lot of networking, and kind of build your resume up that way. That's what I kind of tell to people. So for first steps, I think a lot of the folks who end up being in these Scientists in Park fellowships are kind of in that boat where they've left. Some are still in undergrad, some are finishing up or have recently finished. And are getting those first experiences. And I would say enjoy this time. And when you're in this position, because this is the most flexibility you'll probably ever have in your career, and trying to figure out, hopefully you have the means to do things like internships. I know we have some of the fellows, and are there interns on here too, or is it all just the fellows here?
It's both.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so fellows are amazing opportunities. That gives you a wide open door with the direct hire authority, and it's a really cool opportunity. Internships are, some people need a little extra means to get the opportunity to be in an internship, but take those if you can, figure out a way to make it work. I know ESA has been great in partnering with the NPS and giving people opportunities and making it so it's not a burden, on people. So yeah, do what you can. If you got to work waiting tables at night and volunteering, banding birds during in the morning, just do those sorts of things and meet people. So.
Yeah, and networking is so important. I mean, I can't speak for federal positions, but I took, after my undergrad, I took 2 gap years before I was in grad school, and just those 2 years in which I just worked tech job after tech job. And it was the people that I met along the way that were literally the reasons I even got into school. And so I'm hoping it's the right approach to just with federal positions too, of, those people that you meet, and that they can really help you get that position down the road.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, the networking is important, but really finding people who want to mentor you, it's not just necessarily getting to know people, but find somebody who is willing to give some energy and time to you, and it's kind of like any relationship you get in, right? You don't want to be in something they're just getting something from you and you're not getting anything in return. So really look at the relationships that you're building and find the ones that are uplifting you and helping you reach your goals.
Yeah, and I would add to that mentoring note, that's really important. It's great to have someone who's sort of your champion, and that, like, getting hired into the federal system can seem really challenging, but somebody who's just worked with you and knows all of the amazing work you've done is going to be a key person to help you build your resume and remind you. I think often people do a lot of work and develop a lot of skills that they forget about. And So having, like, before you leave your position, or, you know, even after you're gone, contacting that person who was your supervisor and hopefully your mentor, and getting them to help you develop like a federal resume, or a resume for a different position if you decide that, like, you don't want to go to the federal route, can be really helpful. And that's somebody who knows you and wants you to succeed.
I'll definitely second that too. I had a good mentor at the Fish and Wildlife that, you know, was constantly, you know, checking in every year or so, like, what are you up to now? And you know, he's like, well, here's my resume. If you're going to apply to federal jobs, you can kind of model it after this, or, you know, let me take a look at your resume, or, you know, and kind of give you some tips. And USA Jobs things is always changing of, you know, how best to navigate that world. So it's always nice to have somebody who has experience in that area that can kind of help you navigate it too. It's a little bit unfortunate that that's, you know, you have to know that system to get through it. And that's why I like the Scientists in Park program so much, as well as it's a much easier entry for people to get into the parks, because it's, you know, there's not all these weird things that you have to navigate with the application. You just kind of put in the application, and then you know, you kind of get reviewed, whereas there's so many screenings that you got to pass, I feel like, in the USA Jobs portion if you're applying that route. So yeah, definitely agree with having somebody try to maybe seek out somebody in a field that you're interested in pursuing too, and they can help you out the most.
So if there's no direct questions from the audience now, I think another good one that's posed on this list, that's another good segue, is what skills have proven essential to all of you?
Plant identification, plant identification. I can't say that enough. Like, learn some plants. It's funny. I think my scientist in park, he's clapping right now, Chris Poland. He probably thinks I'm a fool, because he knows like 10 times more plants than I can. But things I think are like one species, he's like, there's actually 3 species of that. But it's cool. But basic plant identification, know the things that are in the world around you. It goes a long way for getting work. That's why my first job was because of one class I took that taught me how to identify plants. And I went to the Forest Service, and I got myself rolling in the right direction because of that. But it doesn't have to just be plants, right? There's other skills. So basic skills like wetland delineation, or, you know, if you're more into geology, you know, be able to classify soils and things like that. But just find some basic skills and build on those. There's like even like trainings, like Ohio EPA has all their standard methodologies, like headwater stream surveys and all sorts of, you know, basic protocols that you can learn, and that can be a really good foot in the door. And also, I think learning how to call things by their name is really the first step to understanding their interactions. So it's a great place to start. And right now we're kind of in a weird place where you have an opportunity to utilize technology to make yourself better at these sorts of things, but don't get stuck in the trap where you're relying so heavily on your technology. You know, use these things like iNaturalist and Seek and whatever you need to help yourself out, but dig a little deeper, get a book, field guides and things like that, and start to understand things a little bit deeper. So that is my advice. That's always been the best way to get when you're at this stage in your career, is to develop those skills. And that can also go to just to span it out, like how to make maps in GIS, like the basics. Go to the basics, whatever that area of interest you have. As a field biologist or someone doing resource management in a terrestrial environment of temperate forest, but plant identification is number one.
Yeah, and actually, I love it when people say plant identification, even though I feel like I'm becoming more of an ecologist and less of a botanist, where I'm like, it's a tree. But I think, yeah, I would add just keeping, because I think as you get into resource management positions, you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to be a Renaissance scientist. And so like Ryan referenced, like knowing how to make a map. And I think that's like one thing I took away from my graduate school experience is like knowing how to like analyze data quickly and roughly, knowing how to kind of manage a project and leverage a lot of sources of information, doing like a quick literature review or something maybe even more informal than a literature review, but like learning how to identify sources of information that will help you like figure out the science that's already known about what questions need to be asked or answered to enact like restoration plans or to certain conservation measures is really important. So yeah, maybe knowing a little bit of R, knowing your way around like Esri products or other like maybe freer mapping products, and being able to get the information you need and manage, like do a project management. So develop something to finish it is really important skill.
Yeah, I second all of that. And I would say, you know, finding the thing that really interests you and motivates you is going to help in the long term. Because I'd say like one of the skills that is essential is you kind of have to continue learning while you're in the job and in your positions. And so if it's already exciting to you, the thing that you're in, it's much easier to kind of stay on top of those things and stay interested and kind of find out the latest what's going on in that particular field or technology, or, you know, whether it's GIS or R or writing reports or, you know, plant or animal identification. If those things are interest to you and you have a passion for it, it'll be easier to stay engaged in that. And so that's always what I'm kind of looking for when we're hiring scientists in parks, is they don't necessarily need to know every plant and animal out there, but just to show that there's an interest in identifying the plants, because that's a big part of the monitoring work that we do. Is we go out to a plot and we identify every single plant in that plot. So it's not just the ones you're interested in, it's, you know, the weeds too, the little, you know, things grow it, like the grasses. So finding it, you know, seeing if people have an interest in that is kind of the first step in my mind. And usually it works out great. And people are willing to, you know, take the time to learn all of these new plants if they haven't experienced a Hawaii ecosystem before. If they have that interest and it shows in their application and resume, then it's just, you know, it's easy from that point on.
And one thing I would add that's kind of, you know, I maybe hadn't predicted this from going from grad school to here, is how important being able to write a grant or a proposal for a project for funding remains in the Park Service. So being able to kind of develop a project idea and then explain that clearly in writing is a pretty critical element of continuing to do work at a park. So even for internal funding, we have to figure out what the fund managers want to know about the project, which can change just like any grant that you apply for, and then explain that clearly so we can fund like pretty critical work, like, you know, all of our weed management, all of our restoration, all of our management of hazard trees, works that we're mandated to do still requires a clear funding proposal. So getting an opportunity to look at what that looks like in the program you're working for currently can be really helpful, because it helps you understand how to frame projects and how to talk about them with colleagues and to get your work funded.
Great, thank you guys. I'm starting to get some questions in the chat, and so this is switching gears a bit, but I have one question that says, how to manage natural resources versus cultural importance in visitor experience.
Can you say that again?
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I saw your eyes get real big, right?
Yeah, It's phrased how to manage natural resources versus cultural importance and visitor experience.
Yeah, I love that question. That's like my everyday life here at Cuyahoga Valley. So we're an interesting park. If you haven't been here, I'll give you a little background. It's about 30,000 acres between Cleveland, Ohio and Akron, Ohio. So a lot of urban, suburban interfaces going on. We got 25 miles of river, the Cuyahoga, which you might have heard burnt back in the 60s and a couple times, but it doesn't catch on fire anymore. It's actually doing really well. But our park was founded originally as a national recreation area and was focused on my God, why is the word rural landscape sort of idea, preserving this rural space between the urban centers of Cleveland and Akron. And we had the Ohio and Erie Canal and all these historic buildings and all that stuff. So there's this push to preserve that cultural and agricultural resources, lots of prehistoric resources as well. So that was back in the 70s. And now that we've acquired all this land, it's actually been because we're really good at not doing things on properties that we own, and agricultural fields have turned into forests. We're seeing the natural communities naturally rebounding, and we have like a tremendous natural resource park now that wasn't originally the intent to it. So we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we balance all these things? What's really, I think I'll kind of shorten the story up and get sort of the NPS, the big NPS picture here, where our mission is preserve and protect, which maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. That's a very challenging, preservation in this time and place is really a challenging situation, and maybe an ideology that we need to move beyond. But that preservation and protection idea, it always brings up those values when you have a park that has cultural and natural resources that are featured. Luckily at Cuyahoga Valley, we went through a process of creating what's called a foundation document where we identified our fundamental resources. So that's kind of the key place to start. Like, we've got all sorts of problems and all sorts of things we need to deal with. But I think understanding what's the park's purpose and mission, why are we here, and what are we trying to achieve with this space, and making sure that that work that you're doing is critical and mission critical and associated with that park mission. So that's kind of like the first place where I start. We actually have Chris Poling, our fellow right now, is doing a really cool project that's kind of helping us understand how do we balance this cultural and natural resource issues. So he's, we have the Ohio and Erie Canal, right? So like parts of the canal have just been like left in ruins. And we went through this process of doing a cultural landscape report, which the product of that was giving us management strategies and treatments for the canal as far as what we should do with it. And before we started this process, some of us were really worried because the canal, where it's in ruins, actually it's created some really cool vernal pool habitats, wetlands, wildlife love it. There's cool plants in there. And we were kind of like, oh my gosh, are they going to tell us we need to clear out all the vegetation and restore the canal to its historic condition? And what's going to happen? And so the cultural landscape folks, that through their process, they did a study and they found that the integrity of that resource is no longer maintained to a point where restoring it to its historic condition is really, it doesn't make sense. That's not what they're going to recommend. So we're trying to figure out, how do we maintain that canal in a way where people can still interpret the cultural significance of this resource. So the canal is right next to the river with the towpath in between it. So they told us we want to manage it as a wetland. So if we have water in this canal prism every once in a while, even if there's vegetation growing in it, people going on the canal, they can see this sort of wetland situation and kind of in their mind be like, oh, that's where the canal was. So they're still getting that cultural resource story that they can tell. Yeah, we're maximizing the environmental value of that sort of thing. So it's a big challenge to balance those cultural and natural and the visitor experience. But I think it's really, when you get down to it, sometimes you have to make decisions that don't make sense ecologically or based on conservation, but the decision should be supported by that park's mission, basically.
Great, thank you for that. I have 2 questions in the chat. I'll ask Laura if your mic's working to hop on and ask hers, and then Allie Mars. Laura, do you want to hop on, or I can read the question too. Oop, all right, I'll ask it for you. Okay, so Laura asks, related to some of what was said earlier, I'm curious about how you leverage your PhD experiences versus a master's degree for getting a job or moving positions. I'm about to finish my PhD, and I'm wondering how a PhD will set me apart from candidates with a master's degree, if it will at all. Anybody want to hop in on that one?
I think it totally just depends on the situation. You know, there's the experience side of it and there's the education side of it, and having both of those things are gonna put you ahead of everybody else. Sometimes just having one of those things is enough. And I don't know, I can't really say that one is gonna benefit you more than the other. I think you need both of them. But it certainly, you know, doesn't hurt to have more experience in that experience or education, I feel like. But I don't know, I've heard it vary across like a lot of different areas. So I think, you know, like you'd still probably want to do that. Like if you just have the education side of things, I think you'd still want to get some experience, you know, hands-on experience, whether that be, you know, just volunteering at the beginning, or if you can, you know, get a particular postdoc position where you want to. I'd say you still kind of want to get that, to feel it out in the job and see, you know, that side of things to help you position yourself to what job you want in the Park Service. So yeah, I don't know. I'll pass it on to Beth and Ryan, because
Yeah, I don't have a master's degree, so I and maybe I should have gotten one. But it sort of depends on, sometimes both master's programs and PhD programs in the biological sciences have a lot of independence compared to, say, PhD programs in other fields where you're often working on a really directed project, like where you're coming in, there's funding for you to do this work, and it's a little bit more of a traditional training environment. But I think what's really important is if your master's was like that, that was really independent, you developed the project or took on a lot of the project development, design, writing, you want to detail that. And the same with your PhD. Like a PhD is research development and some classes, right? But it's really kind of like managing a little independent research program. And so I think what you want to be able to define is to like how that walks to the skills of, say, like a GS11 level position, in managing budgets and in writing grants and data management, which is huge and is always like the last thing we remember to do, but like really good data management and analyses and reporting, and be able to detail those things out. So, you know, whatever level of education you've got, you just want to be able to translate the experience of that work as a work experience, outside of putting the degree on your resume.
I'm gonna jump. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna jump
go ahead,
in.
Jessica. Yeah, go for it.
Real quick. So we're getting a couple questions going in the chat, and I think we're gonna run out of time before we can answer all the questions. So maybe if we can get some of the panelists to respond to some of the questions like directly in the chat, and others to say it verbally, that way we can go a little bit faster as we widen down to the end of the webinar. That would be super helpful. That way we get everybody's questions answered.
Cool.
So yeah, Allie asked a question. Her mic's not working, but she asked a question a while back, saying, Ryan, I'd love to hear more about working on your PhD while in a permanent position. And how do you balance working on both at the same time? And what was your motivation for getting a PhD?
Oh,
So
wow.
multiple parts.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's really out of balance, and it's been challenging. So part of the time, really the first 4 years of my PhD, I'm in year 10 or 8, maybe 8, 9, whatever. So I was in a pathways position, and the park allowed me to balance my schooling by letting me, I basically worked all winter and summer and then went part-time in the fall where I was focusing on my research. If I could go back and change it all and like align my work that I was doing with what I'm doing here at the park, it would have made it much easier and more efficient. But they've been two separate things. I'm to the point now where the PhD itself, and I kind of had this, I knew this going into it. I knew the PhD itself was not going to be the golden ticket that made all my work dreams come true, right? I knew that at some point in my career, I think that PhD was really going to help. But to get started, I think kind of some of the stuff we've talked about here, like it doesn't guarantee you, like you're walking out of your program with a PhD, you might land right in a GS11, a perfect position that you could spend 30 years in. But that's not really necessarily the case that I've seen for most people. They kind of have to take positions that are below what they think they qualify for. So with a PhD, you qualify at a GS11. Maybe you have to take a 5, a 7, or a 9 to get started and get rolling. But I kind of haven't done a good job of balancing it. So it's something I really struggle to complete. And working full time and working on a PhD is really challenging. I think that I'm glad that I didn't change what I was doing, because I'm doing some really exciting stuff that I'm super excited about and diversifies my skill set. So I've been able to work with folks out on Kauai doing a study of cat predation on endangered Hawaiian seabirds, which I would never have been able to do if I just stayed focused on deer management and things here. And the things that I've learned about conservation and seeing the big picture of what we're trying to do as far as park service goals and even like societal goals of conservation. It's really opened my eyes in a lot of ways. So first, I guess the answer is it's not easy to balance. It's stressful. I wouldn't recommend it. If you're finishing up a PhD, maybe stick to it. You might be starting to get that itch to get another job, but just power through and finish it. There'll be jobs for you in the future. But the whole, again, the motivation, I think that was one of the questions, not necessary for a job. So within the Park Service, I've never seen a position, maybe there are some, but I've never seen a position that requires a PhD. To qualify at the GS11 level, you don't need a PhD. You need 3 years of progressive graduate education towards a PhD. It's kind of a weird technicality. I don't know why it says that. I have seen positions in USGS. It's more of a research-based group where you need a PhD for that. So within the NPS, you can get the same place with experience. But then that said, within the National Park Service, we have different divisions. I'm at a park. I'm based out of a park. We have the Natural Resources Stewardship and Science division, which they do more science, and having a PhD is going to give you a one-up in getting somewhere in there. Or Inventory and Monitoring division is more focused on that, the science of things. So take a serious look at your goals and see if that PhD is really something that can help you get there. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I see, thanks Beth and Jacob for answering some of the earlier questions in the chat. Jessica, do you see any questions I'm missing that either have been addressed in the chat or I missed them earlier?
I mean, this is kind of, so the GIS thing, I pulled that from the registration list, and I see, Beth, that you responded to that, but any of you all as panelists, did you really have like a foundational understanding of GIS going into the Park Service? I mean, I'm seeing tons of like hiring, managing posts on USA Jobs these days are like GIS experience. And a lot of programs don't have it really integrated into their school. You have to go back and get a separate certificate or something like that. So I know, Beth, you mentioned on-the-job learning. Is that really a reality, or maybe it is for you in your park? I don't know others. So
yeah, so I have no formal training in GIS, and I learned it all at my first internship. And they were just like, I watched a couple videos or something, and then just learned. And so I still feel like that's honestly, if you're outside of the theory of like geospatial information and remote sensing, that's the way to do it. if you have the time, ask to do that, because the Park Service has the licenses to access AGOL and ArcPro, and they have the licenses to access training. So ask for that as part of your professional development experience in your position. Like you could spend a few hours and just get the basics of how to make a simple map, and then you have GIS experience. A lot of my positions have been GIS heavy because it's the way we manage or collect data. And it's honestly has paid off. Like I took that experience into my PhD program, and I was able to manage my field data much more easily than I think some of my coworkers with less professional experience were, because I just kind of knew a little bit about GIS, and I then was able to take that experience and bring it into this position. And I think increasingly people want someone who has that experience, but I think that's a reasonable ask of your current position, or, pursuing some sort of watch some YouTube videos on it in your free time. There's ways to make maps in R. R is a programming language that's free, and you can do really cool mapping, and it's kind of magical to write code and have a map appear. And there's QGIS and other programs that are free or low cost. But I do think if that's something you want experience in, ask for it now, and then use the resources the Park Service has to get that experience in in the Esri products, which are way too expensive to have if you're not a student or not part of an agency that has that institutional license.
Yeah, and I didn't get any formal, when I first started, I didn't have formal training. And when I was an undergrad, it was I graduated in 2007, and it was really just kind of only the specialists were really taking it. I knew one person who was doing it. But now I think anybody in any natural resource field should take some courses, or just take courses online. Esri has free courses. The problem is you have to just know how to solve. It's really about knowing how to solve problems in a GIS environment, because you're going to learn how to do something, and then you'll go to apply it, and it won't work the same way. Either you'll get weird errors that you didn't get when you learned it, because it's just, that's how GIS products work, or the tool has changed. The tool is constantly changing. And unfortunately, the Park Service is usually behind the curve too. So the park I was at before, 5 years ago, was using mobile app technology to do data collection. And we're only just now really starting to realize the opportunity, with lots of limitations still. So you just need to know it in a diverse way, and how to solve those sorts of problems, because whatever you were trained to do, you can come to the Park Service and it's going to be very different. So it's just about poking around, scratching your head, getting headaches, and hopefully not breaking your computer, and just understanding that it's all about problem solving and learning how to search something on Google and figure out what the issue is.
Yeah, that can definitely be a daunting task, but once you get over, I feel that learning curve, I don't know, you just Google everything. Let's see.
Luckily for GIS and R, there's a lot of good tutorials out there. So it is something you can kind of pick up. The big issue is, Esri getting if you can get it a temporary. I think I did that one time. I actually took GIS in my undergrad, and then eventually got to a position that was asking if, I'd use the latest one, and I hadn't used it in a while. So I downloaded a 60-day trial or 30-day trial, and got myself back up to speed on it, with the latest version, so that I could at least talk about it intelligently on an interview, when I got asked about it. So, there's things that you can do like that to try to keep up on it. But I'd say, those two for me, I got some R experience in grad school, and then GIS experience in undergrad and grad school. And those two, kind of technical side of things, have really helped out in this position.
So we're nearly at time, Alex. I was going to say, does anybody have one more question? Because if not, I'm going to ask one, but I want to give an opportunity for somebody else too. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. All right, so you're all natural resource managers, and and you all work for MPS, and we know that there's kind of this bureaucratic chain that you have to deal with on a daily in terms of actually making changes for your park. So how do you think that you manage kind of, I'm going to use the term I learned in the Everglades 2 weeks ago, a slow moving river of change. How do you manage that with your stakeholders? Are they a key role player for you all in terms of executing real natural resource management changes by kind of creating those external pressures or helping you to bolster the change within your own organization? Kind of heavy for an end of the talk, but I figured I'd throw it out there.
Well, I'll just say, you know, in our environment, in our space here in Northeast Ohio, in a lot of ways, we are one of the stakeholders. There's a community trying to restore the Cuyahoga River and the Cuyahoga River watershed. So it's really cool and challenging to kind of find where and when you play what role, essentially. So we had a dam that was in our park. We own all the property around it. Cleveland Metro Parks owns some of it. So like that, figuring out what your role is and what expertise that you can bring to the table, I think is always challenging and important. And I don't know how other parks really function, and a lot of them are, I mean, we're so intertwined with other agencies, municipalities and things that we're largely in what's the word here? I've got to be careful what I say. Yeah, so we have stakeholders who don't like what we're doing. We have those that do like what we're doing, and it's just finding kind of that balance between the two. Like we have people who like live in this park, like they rely on having utilities running to their park and roadways where, you know, if we wanted to restore the forests and wetlands, it's like, let's pull all the roads out. But then how does somebody get emergency response, or how does somebody's school bus pick their family up, you know, things like that. So we luckily do rely a lot on stakeholders, and I think the biggest thing is letting them understand who we are, what our mission is, and trying to meet somewhere in the middle, and knowing that other stakeholders have their mission, whether it's a municipality or another conservation organization. It's just about being upright and honest, and kind of finding a place where you have a shared goal, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say agree with that. And the more different stakeholders you can invite to the table, the better outcome, the less resistance you're going to have for a particular, you know, management item that you're hoping, you know, would work for the park. And I'd say, you know, too, for the partnerships is really important, because there's only a certain amount of staff that you have in the park service, and a lot of times it's not enough to be managing that big amount of land. And then you have all of these adjacent landowners too that are up against the same kind of issues that you're up against. And so I think going forward, partnerships are going to become even more a thing that you'll see in the park service. You know, there's one that we work with a lot at Hawaii Volcanoes, Three Mountain Alliance, where it's just, you know, all the different federal agencies, the private landowners that are adjacent, you know, Nature Conservancy, nonprofits, they're all kind of combined in this, and everybody's sharing ideas, and it works out, I think, better in the long run doing things from that kind of approach, where you're inviting as many people to the table as possible for deciding on outcomes for resource management.
Yeah, great. Thank you, guys. I've not seen any additional questions in the chat. Jessica, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, that was fantastic. I'd like to drive home the importance of stakeholders and nonprofits like ESA, and how we can help influence and kind of incorporate change. And when I know that there's a lot of different hoops you all have to jump through in order to actually put things into action sometimes. So I want to say special thanks to Alex for being our moderator today. And of course, our panelists, Ryan, Beth, and Jake. You all were phenomenal for taking out time in your very busy day to just sit here and hang out and talk with the interns. With that being said, join us for our next webinar on allyship workshop. We're going to kind of dive deep into what it means. And that will be hosted at 3 o'clock on July 21st. Jesse's dropping the registration link in the chat box. And thank you all participants for coming. We'll see you next time. Panelists, if you don't mind hanging back for just a moment, I'd like to chat with you, but everyone else, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and maybe some of you are getting the weekend started early. Take care.